do and how they see the road ahead of us. Also along for the ride, quite literally in her car, en route to a flight to Atlanta, is Rylan Potter, my colleague, who's Vice President of Business Development at WDM USA. And she's been championing the safety benefits of continuous friction measurement of the road surface for the past 4 years with increasing success. It's now recognized by Federal Highways as one of its key safety preventative measures. Well, first, a bit of deja vu before we get to the discussion. I started last month's live stream event by mentioning the study by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They claim that traffic crashes in the US cost society $340 billion in 2019. That's $1,000 for each of the country's 328 million people. And with fatal crashes continuing to rise, it was no surprise that NHTSA's study was followed by the US DOT strategic plan. Now, it focuses on improving safety, and one of its key priorities was obtaining more quality data about the state of American roads. It highlighted two critical research topics: safety infrastructure countermeasures and safety risk analysis methods. This would need to be backed up by data-driven system safety, safety design, and safety data. And that's why we're having today's discussion. So without further delay, let's go to Jacob first to hear his thoughts on that strategic plan and the role Blinksy could play in helping deliver safer roads. Jacob.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it, and really excited to be joining this webinar today. As a whole, I think the strategic safety plan that came out really makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of times people have, your everyday person has a hard time visualizing what that means. With an average of about 43,000 deaths on the roads in the U.S. every single year. I mean, one of the ways I like to put that in comparison is, and whenever a 747, an airplane goes down, it becomes news all over the world. When you calculate out the number of deaths on the roadway every single year, it comes out to about every 4 to 5 days in the U.S. 4 to 5 days a week that there's would be equivalent to a 747 going down. So it really puts in perspective, why there's such a need for this type of initiative, an initiative that needs to go across the whole entire country, state by state, agency by agency. It's specifically when looking at the data, we see that I believe this week the Governors Highway Safety Association came out with the preliminary data for 2022, and there were 3,434 road deaths, pedestrian deaths alone on the roadways. That's up 18% from 2019 and 5% from 2022. Obviously, there's a difference due to the pandemic in terms of the people on the roadway. Blinksy as a whole, our goal is to deliver, like you said, movement intelligence and data to the agencies that are managing our roadways. The way we do this is we use crowdsourced dash cam footage. So meaning cameras that are already driving the roadways, whether an Uber, Lyft, a tractor trailer, Amazon last mile delivery vehicle. We partner with dash cam manufacturers and have access to the imagery of these vehicles driving down the roadway. Through that imagery, what we're able to do is use our AI vision to see and understand what's going on the roadways in a way that's never been available before. We're passively collecting data from around 400,000 daily active users. Comes out to about 20 million miles of roadway in the U.S. we can see every single day. With that, we survey assets, safety critical assets on the roads, and our goal is to deliver insights into these assets in a historically, very manual way that has, gone through manual surveys in the past. I'd like to point out that the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, had a call on private companies that they also need to step up and do their part to help reduce these fatalities and reduce accidents on the roadways. Blinksy as a whole, we wanted to step up and do our part. So just like there is a WZDX exchange, if you're not familiar, it's a work zone and data exchange that any state and agency can upload their data to and becomes open source for public companies and private companies. to public agencies and private agencies to be able to share that data so it can be used in a robust way to support it. So what we've done is we've come up with we call it SafeX data exchange, which is available to any agency who wants to join, and becomes a public use case. What SafeX is Blinksy, what we want to do is we want to look at the safety critical assets and make them available. So we're talking about, and I'll give a couple examples: curved road, road curve signs, school zone crossings, crosswalks. These type of assets, when you speak with agencies, a lot of times, the agencies might know where they are, but they're on, let's say, a 4-year survey cycle, and even that has gaps. So being able to really see and understand where these different critical assets are, and be able to take that information, which an agency can have publicly uploaded, and include that in a Google Maps or a Waze or something along those lines, being able to pull that information and say, hey, you're coming around this curve. There's a school zone coming up. There's a crosswalk coming up. You need to be more aware of what's going on. So really taking that data that that's passive being collected through these dash cameras, making it available for any agency to join and pull that data, use it internally to better manage those assets. Whether it's grading of crosswalks or down signs or covered signs with vegetation, things along those lines, being able to take that data and use it internally to better manage those assets, and externally to make it available for those third-party public companies to really use that data to help support and answer that call to better manage the roadways.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm very interested to hear you mention road curves and curvature and so on. Obviously, nearly half of fatalities in the US involve some kind of roadway departure, and they're generally on curves. So it's an area I know that we as a company are particularly interested in, and that's why we feel that friction data is so important. Just before we go to Ryland to talk about friction data and lots of other things, I would just want to thank our audience for joining us today, and point out we will be making time at the end for questions. So if you've got anything that you want to say to us, or anything we feel we could contribute to you, please post them in the text box, and we'll use them at the end. So Ryland, sitting there in your car, are you taking a chance, or you parked safely, I hope?
I think it's important to note that I'm not flying my car to Georgia. I do plan on leaving it behind. No, I appreciated, John, the chance to get to speak on this today, and specifically on the U.S. DOT strategic plan. It feels like a real watershed moment in U.S. transportation. There was a period in the mid-2010s where serious and fatal crashes were on a downward trend, and that gave a lot of people hope and maybe a little bit of false comfort that it was a preview of better days to come. Unfortunately, these last couple of years have showed us that those advances were somewhat illusory, and there's been a real reckoning with what it takes, both politically and financially, to create better outcomes on U.S. roads. As you said at the top, the NHTSA report has spotlighted the economic cost of crashes, and that's a great frame for people to carry with them. Yes, it will cost money to improve our existing roads and build the kinds of roads that keep people safe. But when you balance it against the cost of the ongoing damage we're doing to ourselves and our economy, the question isn't why any longer, it's how. And I think the U.S. DOT strategic plan lays out the how very effectively. In the strategic plan, safety comes first, starting from the assumption that we shouldn't have to risk our lives to go to the grocery store or to take the kids to soccer practice. And, the plan further assumes that transportation access is economic access. So, to relay a little bit of an anecdote, we do a lot of work in Eastern Kentucky, which experienced catastrophic flooding last summer. We heard stories of people missing work and occasionally losing their jobs. because, for example, the only bridge connecting their town to a major regional route had washed out and the surrounding roads were impassable. We know systems will fail, which is why we try and build redundancy in or have plans in place to rapidly restore access on core assets when issues inevitably arise. And again, you have safety, which means roads should be built in a way that acknowledges the reality that having fewer available countermeasures makes it riskier to drive those roads. US DOT describes this as a blueprint, and from where I sit in my car at WDM USA, the strategies identified under the safe design and safe systems sections and that are further outlined in the US DOT's National Roadway Safety Strategy do just that.
Well, that's great. As I say, mentioning, as I did before, about continuous friction measurement vehicles. I mean, you can see one behind me here. This is one of the beasts that we use in Kentucky, and I think it's worth emphasizing the fact of how effective it's been in helping reduce the number of skid-related fatalities and deaths and road deaths. And remarkably, those skid-related fatalities kind of estimated 8,000 to 10,000 people a year in the US alone. That's remarkable. In the UK and New Zealand, where we've traditionally operated for the last kind of half a century, SCRIM surveys have helped reduce those deaths by nearly 40%. And more states are now recognizing the benefits of having more data. The more knowledge they have about how the roads are performing and the relationship they have with vehicles, then steps can be taken to make those roads safer. And it's interesting, Jake, to hear, you take the data, live data from kind of 400,000 vehicles and assimilate that into areas where data has previously been collected. And certainly as the future comes, we're going to find that more and more connected vehicle data is going to be available. But as a company, we feel that there's got to be a base measurement there so that you know exactly what it means. We all know people make mistakes when driving, and I'm certainly, nobody expects to die because of them. But if the road surfaces provide them with the better grip, they've got a better chance of recovering from those errors, unlike if a plane goes down. So, perhaps we can do something about the roads that, that's the essence, really, of the US DOT plan. Jake, a few more thoughts on how we move things forward.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the nail. What we need is more data, but not just data, more usable data. I've spoken to dozens of agencies, and they will get data from various sources, and they say this is a data overload. This goes way beyond what we can process, and what will actually have a positive effect on our workflow. So the goal is really to give these agencies the data that's going to have a positive effect on their day-to-day operations and their workflow. And doing that in a way that they can support their assets and their roadways and support national goals along the way. Just as a kind of an example, we look at guardrails or impact attenuators. This is a focus of one of the detections of blinksy in our paper product. And what this really does is, you hear from agencies that they have, thousands and thousands of miles of guardrails along their roadways. They can't survey those every single day. They can't survey those a lot of times every single month. And, ideally what unfortunately will happen is someone will strike that asset and, their vehicle will keep going. They don't want to deal with it and it'll be damaged and they'll keep driving. Unfortunately, what that means for the next person who strikes that asset is it's not going to do what it's supposed to do, and they're going to have a much more critical injury. So being able to identify the defects and issues with assets and roadway condition is going to become a critical component of improving our infrastructure and improving the ability for your everyday road user to get to where they're going in a safe way. Where, like Rylan said, that's where they're not just getting in their car and driving their kids to soccer practice is not something that they have to really think. am I going to get there because of the condition of the roadway, and how that works. So yeah, like I said, just increasing the data, but usable data that can be digested by the agencies and used to improve their workflows. I think the critical point, whether it's information coming from a service like Blinksy or from your team where you're checking road friction data, being able to deliver that and in a way that they'll be able to improve those assets and the infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. And I know we, as a company, have been looking closely at the data that we've been collecting in the US with our scrum machines and analyzing the vital role that it can play. I mean, Ryland, the future is the way that we use that data, isn't it? Enable our, the states to actually make some positive moves.
Yeah. So, I can take the safe design focus as within the strategic plan as a starting point. And two of the strategies outlined in that section are: one, adopt roadway design and countermeasures that anticipate human error, as you were saying, and two, encourage performance-based design that applies funding to lower cost design treatments that optimize safety across the entire system. So what designs are successful and what strikes the right balance of cost and cost effectiveness? How do you measure that performance? That's data, and it's data, like the kind that Jake and I are talking about today. You have to know what you want to measure, how you're going to go about measuring it, how to relate it to the question or problem at hand, and how to make decisions using it. And I really appreciate this point that Jake brought out about the importance of, not just having data or good data, but what is it that you do with it? Is it something that's fundamentally going to be digestible by a DOT in a way that improves their workflow or helps them make a better decision? The data is not the end in itself. It's what you do with it. And so I think there's a fundamentally complementary relationship between the types of, behavioral reporting or asset infrastructure data that companies like Blinksy provide and the high resolution, precise pavement surface data that WDM provide. In the safe systems section of the US DOT strategic plan, the overarching objective is to strengthen data-driven decision-making through safe systems and improve safety management systems. And within that specifically, USD calls out the need to use data and data analytics to take a proactive action to address emerging safety risks and support compliance. And I would say, SCRIM continuous pavement friction data is critical to establishing the roadway factors that contribute to elevated risk. This allows DOTs to take a systemic look across their networks, identify where conditions lead to elevated safety risk, and take action to mitigate those risks before fatal and serious injury crashes occur. And that, to me, is the strategic plan's fundamental promise, that we don't have to wait for an unconscionable number of deaths to occur before we take action. We have the tools, and if we know how to deploy them and we do so in a systemic way, we can take action to reduce and ultimately prevent crashes. So, do we need SCRIM continuous pavement friction data? Yes. Can SCRIM data help us make better decisions about when, where, and how to treat pavement surfaces? Yes. Can SCRIM data help us identify the characteristics of our road networks that contribute to elevated crash risk? Yes. Can SCRIM data help us understand whether roads are being designed and constructed in compliance with DOT requirements? Yes. So, ultimately, should DOTs incorporate SCRIM data into safety management systems and data-driven programming? Yes.
Yeah, certainly. I know that the Federal Highways Administration has been running pool schemes among quite a number of states now to introduce them to continuous friction measurement. And I know that some 28 or so years ago, when we first went to New Zealand, how important it was then to use the data to make such a powerful argument, to get all stakeholders involved and get them to make positive decisions to move forward. And certainly they did that in New Zealand, and that template is there as something for the US to follow. They did involve all the stakeholders. They involved the safety people, they involved the materials people, they involved the engineers, and they involved the enforcement services. Because at the end of the day, using the data in the right way can have such a powerful effect on the number of people dying. And I think it's pretty clear that people in the US will no longer accept that high risk of fatality or serious injury as a cost of mobility. So it's not unreasonable to expect planners and engineers to come up with a way of minimizing that risk and managing speeds and taking the conflict out of the journey. Jacob and Ryle, I want to put you on the spot, really. I know I kind of suggested what kind of questions I might ask you, just to kind of spice things up. And I really wanted to see, there were lots of movements going on about zero deaths. And I always remember an advert in New Zealand where they spoke to a motorist and said, how many deaths do you think are acceptable on the road? And he said, well, I don't know, maybe 10 a day or something. Or they said 10. Well, maybe a couple a day. And then they pulled back a screen behind him and showed him his family and said, which two members of your family do you want to die today? And maybe all engineers around the world should have that question and say, which members of your family do you want to see die today? Being extreme, I know, but the reality is that we do have to move things forward, and we have to make it personal. We have to make it about people; they're not numbers. So I'm just going to, Ryan, I'm going to come to you first. A quick fix. What can actually any members of our audience out there who've got views? Maybe I hope I've sparked a few of them into reacting and coming back at us. But is there anything? One quick fix that actually move things along.
Yeah, I want to come back to something that you said about kind of enforcement. And one thing that I don't think is widely understood is, even though we've been talking about it a lot today, the role that pavement friction plays in maintaining a safe road surface. You mentioned the pooled fund work. So data from that continuous friction data collected across 10 states was analyzed and showed that, on average, improving pavement friction reduced both wet and dry crashes by 30% overall. But I think something that's even more indicative of the importance of pavement friction is when you look at factors likeliest to decrease crash risk, decreasing traffic is number one. And that makes sense. Crashes are essentially a measure of exposure. That's how most engineers, transportation engineers, measure kind of crash risk. But the second most significant contributor is friction, more than speed, more than geometric design. And I would argue that's in large part because we measure, manage, and enforce speed and geometric design. So, a quick fix is benchmarking your pavement friction using network level continuous friction measurement. Once you've measured, then you can begin to manage. So, I think SCRIM continuous friction measurement is a big part of that solution.
Jake.
Yeah, so I think a big part of it comes down to what we touched on earlier, is that proactive versus reactive management. A lot of times, and you hear through a lot of agencies that the way they deal with issues are reactive. They wait for a phone call, they wait for a semi-annual or once every 4 year or whatever it is survey. And what it does is it makes the roads are less safe for a longer amount of time, and B, it becomes very cost and resource intensive. They're not fixing a little problem; they're waiting till they're fixing a big problem. So being able to really see and understand what's going on your roadways through a system like Paver, where you're not even having to manually send out people to physically survey, where it's all happening automatically and you're just getting delivered insights, really changes the game in terms of how agencies can see and understand and to become more proactive in terms of how they deal with defective, from road condition to impact attenuators, or understanding where the different safety critical components of their roadways are. Really would really change. And also, like Rylan said, is that in the long run, even though there's a cost up front to be able to do these things, in the long run, it's actually going to have a significant reduction in terms of the cost of what it is. And additionally, to touch on the stakeholder point, being able to go to, a lot of times we'll be speaking to agency, and we'll be like, oh, we'll deliver all this information for your roadways, on this day. And they're like, well, that's too much, because we're limited in terms of our resources that we have to actually do this. What it can actually become is, bringing additional stakeholders, taking that information to policyholders and the legislative teams to say, hey, like, this is what's going on our roadways. Bringing that there's no level of of road deaths that are okay on our roads. To really hit that Vision Zero goal of having 0 road deaths, we need to invest in our roadways and in our infrastructure through using new technologies to really improve that and have that high adoption of these technologies.
Okay, I've got one question I'm actually going to use from one of our viewers today, and that is, what's your call to action? Jake?
Be open to change. Definitely, a lot of agencies, they're very, very set in their ways. They've been doing the same thing for a very long part of time. So, when something new comes on, whether it's, from one of our companies, or a different company that's really presenting, a new tool to better manage roadways, be open to learn about them, be open to try them out, and be open to implementing them to better improve your roadways. Get out of those the old way of thinking, and say, hey, this is, we're in an age of rapid technology transformation. Let's tap into that and what's becoming available, and really use it to improve our roadways.
Great. Ryland, call to action.
Yeah. So Jake, I mean, an incredible, I think, summary of where things stand in terms of, what we can do going forward. And I think one of the things that you brought out, talking about how the different stakeholders can be engaged in this process. There are a lot of different data sources. There are a lot of different ways to use the data. I think that DOT is taking the perspective that there are opportunities to collaborate both internally and externally. So, data providers as partners in this solution, and helping to bring different elements to the table and design programs around that, but also to be open to working internally across kind of traditional boundaries to help address some of these problems. None of the problems, road safety is not going to be solved by one particular thing. It's going to be solved by, a bunch of different things working in concert and complementing each other, so that, someone understands how, data over here can help improve decision over there. So I would definitely encourage folks to when they are looking or evaluating data providers, looking for a partner that can bring solutions, but also looking internally to see how the problems they're trying to address, how that may be affected by, or how they can in turn, affect the problems that maybe another group within the organization is facing, and to take those challenges on together.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you both very much for a very interesting discussion. I hope all our listeners drive home safely today. Ryland, I hope you have a safe flight. And Jake, thank you very much. You can go off and enjoy the rest of your day. And I'll say good night from the UK. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, and hope you can all join us again for the next